Our League of Women Voters mission is to encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. We never support or oppose candidates for political parties. And one other note for the League is we're going to be celebrating our 100th birthday next year in February. The celebration is going to be all year long. It's a pretty big thing to think about that happened 100 years ago. A few housekeeping details. I think most of you are probably used to this room, but there's a restroom on this side for women and one on this side for men. We do have to be out of the library in a timely manner, so we really will be wrapping up by 8:30. So Diana will be finishing up, giving time for questions also at the end. I think most of you do know Diana. She's a newly elected Redwood City Council member. She's a community advocate. She's been organizing for more than 20 years. She's championed education, healthcare, housing throughout that career of advocacy. She served on the Housing Leadership Council for San Mateo County as a community builder. She's organizing in communities and advocating for policies to increase affordable housing. She's also served on the San Mateo County Living Wage Task Force and is currently a member of the Working Families Alliance. So as you can see, Diana's had boots on the ground for a long time, and we welcome her. Thank you.
So much. Thank you to the League for asking me to join you tonight to talk about my favorite subject, housing. And thank you all for being here. This is a really important topic, I think. I'm going to show some slides from Urban Habitat, which issued a new report on the resegregating of the region. And this was very startling to me, and so I thought that if there's any group that I'd like to share it with, it's the League. So my thanks to all of you for being here, and if I see you, some of the things I'm going to go over are a little wonky, so I'm going to kind of watch for glassy eyes, and I'll move through sections a little bit more quickly, but hopefully I won't bore you too much. So we're in a housing crisis, right? But there, I see cities and communities trying to find their way out of it. And so there are policies, and I'd like to share some of those with you. There were 83,000 jobs created between 2000 and 2014, and only 7,100 units of housing. So it's no wonder that we've had this pressure on housing. And the wealthiest of our workers are able to take the housing, so that's why we have so much displacement. So this map of the Bay Area is demonstrating, this is the first glance. So I'm kind of showing you, getting this conversation started by showing you the displacement that has happened, and the population that has been most affected is our Black community. And the areas that used to have large residents from the Black community are moving east. And what was startling to me is they're moving to Stanislaus and other counties that are not even close to us. So the county level view of, so with this, the other issue that we need to be aware of is that East Palo Alto, Richmond, Oakland, these cities had a lot of low-income families, and they had a lot of services to support those families. These new communities, in Stanislaus and other places, they don't have the services to support the huge influx of low-income workers that have come to them. So this is another concern for us as a region to just be aware of the impacts that have been created a little bit by us, right? So let's see if so between 2000 and 2014, the region's population grew overall, including us, with increases ranging from 4% in Marin County to almost 25% in San Joaquin. The proportion of residents living in poverty increased in all counties, but the greatest percentages occurred in Contra Costa, Solano, Stanislaus, and Sonoma counties. As a point of reference, poverty rates increased in the latter 3 counties at more than twice the rate of that in San Mateo County, and 2 of the most distant counties, San Joaquin and Stanislaus, also had the highest rates of population growth, and in 2014, the highest levels of poverty. Of the 117 places in our region that have populations of over 10,000, only 11 experienced declines in poverty between 2000 and 2014. 7 jurisdictions experienced increases of at least twice the national average, while the top 3 experienced increases that were 3 times the national average. And amazingly to me, those were Solano, Stanislaus, and Contra Costa counties. So again, this is just another map that's demonstrating, and you can see that those areas, by the color codings, you can see that East Palo Alto, which used to be kind of a haven for affordable housing and a lot of our low-income families lived, is not that anymore, but Redwood City is, because the other population that's been affected by the housing issue are Latino families. But for some reason, this phenomenon has affected our Black families more, because Latino families, which are also being displaced, many of them, I don't even know why, but maybe because of their family structure, they're living in 1 family per bedroom, they're living in garages, they're doing other things that are that other people, are not going to do. So just another map. This is the East Bay changes, and you can see that the darkest levels that are demonstrating poverty are on the outside regions of the Bay Area. Not at all in the peninsula. The population shift is particularly stark, as I said, for Black communities. In 2000, the greatest number of Black residents lived in the inner region of the East Bay, and that would be Richmond and Oakland, and I can, for those who are taking pictures of the slides, I'd be happy to share this with you if you agree, so. I will also share with you the link, the Urban Habitat link for the entire study, because this is just a snapshot of that study. It's not the whole thing. These places in the East Bay experienced the largest decrease, actually, of Black residents from 2000 to 2014. The most substantial increases in the number of Black residents, as I said, for Stanislaus, San Joaquin, and Contra Costa. The 4 largest decreases in the proportion of Black residents relative to the total population occurred in Richmond, Oakland, East Palo Alto, and Berkeley. The absolute loss of Black residents for each was 5,500 in Berkeley, 43,000 in Oakland, 12,000 in Richmond, and 2,700 in East Palo Alto. Although the proportional loss of Black residents in San Francisco was substantially lower than it was in these cities, the absolute loss was a shocking 18,000 residents. Overall, the region has lost 22,000 Black residents during this period. By contrast, the number of Black residents in Antioch nearly doubled to 18,000. In Antioch, representing 17% of the overall population. In Patterson, the Black population increased from 227 to 1,300, and grew proportionally from 1.8 to 6.3% of the total population. The pattern of these large increases in population and proportion occurred in a number of places in eastern Contra Costa and San Joaquin counties. Trends in poverty in Black communities show a somewhat different pattern, with the greatest increases clustered in Santa Clara, Alameda, and Contra Costa. So I will say that this is centered around affordable housing, because the families, let me have that. So the families that so you can see that these are the where we've had the largest decreases, but the families that are going farther out and can afford housing are having less of a challenge with their being able to make ends meet. And that's not so surprising, right? But the downside is that they're having longer commutes, and there are other issues that are affecting their families and their lives. So these I'm just going to go through really quickly, because these are just the top 20 demonstrating the poverty increases, and some of these percentages are really high. And again, this is just within this period of 2000 to 2014. And then those traveling 25 miles or more to work. And the ones that are the farthest away are large percentages, almost 50% of their residents are going, having long commutes. And again, the top 20, it's just the percentages are so alarmingly high. So, moving toward a more just Bay Area, regional resegregation does not have to define the Bay Area of the 21st century. Hopefully, recognition is a useful starting point, and that was my intent tonight, was just to open this door so that you would be aware of how alarming this situation is for people. Hopefully, it is a good starting point, and we will build a long-term vision with a commitment toward racial and economic justice. And one of my issues, too, is fair housing. There are protected classes in our community that we, as a community, are supposed to make sure we have the housing for people from communities of color, people who are disabled, and we don't have the teeth in our federal government to protect or to ensure that we communities are keeping an eye on those numbers. So this is something that's very important to me as a new council member, that we keep an eye on the numbers, that we have adequate affordable housing for all income levels, but we're also looking at protected classes and making sure that we have a diverse community, and that we're making sure that we have the community that, in my view, we've lost.
Diana, could you repeat the protected classes? I got communities of color, disabled?
And disabled, those are just two of the most obvious ones, yeah. So, so this is where you may be falling asleep a little bit. So these are different policies that we can look at our own communities and make sure that we're building affordable housing in the different in all of our communities. So affordable housing tends to be located in older areas of our cities, and housing advocates refer to this as natural affordability. Unfortunately, the majority of those naturally affordable apartment buildings are attractive to speculators and are rapidly being turned into market rate housing. The result is that thousands of families have been displaced, specifically in Redwood City, and we're now closing 3 schools. And that's a direct result of losing families and losing teachers. And some of you may have heard me refer to a teacher in Belmont that quit her job because she was tired of sleeping in her car. And that's not acceptable, right? So this is something that we really need to, affordable housing is not just for poor people. The highest, so there are 4 levels of affordable housing, or 5 really in San Mateo County, and the highest is someone who makes $99,000, and that includes our tenured teachers, our nurses, and our city employees. Someone who makes $51,000 is considered very low in this scenario, and this is all because San Mateo County is such a high wealth area. These would not be the same numbers in Nebraska. This is San Mateo County. So when we're talking about someone who makes $51,000, we're talking about EMTs, nursing assistants, not even nannies or caregivers or other people who are also essential for our community. Let's see, 25,000 units of affordable housing are needed in San Mateo County right now, in order for us to provide the housing at these different levels, not just for low income, but all these levels, we need 25,000 units. As advocates, we can make that happen by promoting a variety of best practices. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So yeah, that's last. So this is the list that we're going to work on right now. I know that you would all be disappointed if I didn't talk about rent stabilization. So where's my list? Oh, here we go. So the first one is a variety of things under anti-displacement. So there are condo conversions. Many times when developers come in and they build multifamily apartment buildings, they will also ask for a condo map. And there are things that we as a city can do to ensure that at least a percentage of those units are saved for current residents and that they're saved at lower incomes, either at moderate, that 99,000, or at a low income. And otherwise, everyone in the apartment building is evicted and they are converted to condos. So it's just the idea of trying to protect people when we can. Just cause for eviction is another example. At the present time in California, landlords can evict anyone, anytime, for any reason. So it's important for some of us to have just cause for eviction ordinances and saying there are 9 actual reasons for evicting people. And they are not paying your rent, creating a problem in your apartment building, doing something illegal. There are very specific reasons for being evicted. And those are the reasons we believe people should be evicted, not just for, I can't stand that you're always wearing that Warriors t-shirt, you know. Preservation of existing affordable housing. As I said, many people who make less money have historically lived in older apartment buildings, right? And so it's really good if we can at least keep a certain percentage, maybe 10-15% of those units for Section 8. Does everyone know Section 8? It's a special category that people can, they have a voucher, a Section 8 voucher, and they can go to landlords and ask them to rent a room to them. And that has actually gone up in San Mateo County. And so San Mateo County was not able to protect their low-income residents, and so that has gone up. So we do encourage landlords to consider renting to low-income residents. And then there's another called income tax credit, which also benefits landlords and is good for generally 15 to 30 years, which can also protect a certain percentage of units in an apartment building. Preservation of mobile home parks. Mobile home parks are kind of the last banyan of affordable housing in many of our communities. So it's really important that we try to protect them if we can. They are also very attractive for development because they are often on pieces of property where people would like to convert them to something else. So in San Mateo County, the mobile home parks are rent controlled. And what that means is that the person who owns the mobile home is renting the property, and the property they're renting on, that is controlled. So the actual home is not, but the land that they're on is. And they also have an ordinance which protects the mobile home park from being converted to something else without having to go through a lot of a difficult time with the county, which I appreciate. Relocation benefits and first right of return, and this has to do with when there's going to be a major redevelopment of a multifamily apartment building, and it's saying that the residents are not to be evicted for this reason, that they have the right to come back to their unit and to stipulate that they are not going to have their rent be twice what it was before. So this is a possibility for us as cities to have ordinances like that to protect our residents. The next one is inclusionary ordinances, and in many of our cities we have what we call affordable housing overlay zones, and that is saying that this particular area we as a council are saying that you can increase the density, but there needs to be a percentage of affordability tied to that density as well. So it's not necessarily 100% affordable, but it does have some protections in it. Incentive zoning, density bonuses, benefit. These are all development agreements that we can have with developers when they're building affordable housing units, to say that we want a percentage of their units to be affordable. And generally, it's just saying that we will let you increase your density if you will have a commensurate number of units be set aside for affordable. Inclusionary housing, that's when, again, it's a development agreement, and it's saying that if you're building in Redwood City, then a percentage of your multifamily homes needs to be affordable. Source of income. So there are a variety of things that it's unlawful to discriminate against race, gender, color, religion, I wrote it all down, sexual orientation, marital status, national origin, ancestry, but not source of income. And so when someone comes to a landlord with a Section 8 voucher, they can say, no, I don't take people like you. So that's an ordinance that some of us are very interested in getting rid of. In saying that there's a source of income ordinance saying that people can't discriminate using that piece. Local funding sources, commercial linkage fee. This is similarly when there's a commercial development. Commercial developments cause the need for housing. And so we cities can have an ordinance that says if you're building a commercial development, that a certain percentage needs to go into our affordable housing fund. Housing impact fees, same thing. If you're building residential multifamily homes, then a percentage needs to go into the affordable housing fund. Federal home sharing. These are federal home funds, and we in Redwood City send funds to Menlo Park. This is an example of how this works. Sent funds to Menlo Park, and they were building a project that was mostly veterans. And with the stipulation, we had the money, and we wanted some of our residents to take advantage of it. So it was a cooperative thing between the two cities that was really very exciting. Optimized affordable housing sites. Every 7 years, the cities are told through regional housing need allocation, they call it RENA numbers, how many housing units we need to provide at different affordability levels. Redwood City, for instance, has done really well, over 300% market rate, almost zero of the lower income levels, and that's true of all of our cities. Some of our cities don't build housing at all. And those cities that build, that approve commercial without any housing, they create a problem for all of us, right? So we just need to be on top of these things. priority development areas. These are, so the state, in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, identified PDAs, priority development areas. And these are areas where we would create more housing along transit corridors. And they would be more density, they would be, have levels of affordability, and so that many workers could take advantage of it. We would have fewer people driving. Site and building regulations. Parcel assembly. This is when we often have smaller parcels. If we were to put them together, we would have a large area where we have multifamily homes, larger apartment building. And so there are different incentives that we could have an ordinance that would encourage parcel assembly. So that's, I'm not going to get into too much details about that. It's really important to know that for every parking unit that's in our apartment buildings, those units are $5,000 to $60,000, depending on whether they're above ground or below ground. So the fewer parking units that we can allot for the apartment buildings, the more apartment units we can build. And so that's something that, another advantage to building apartment buildings closer to transit, so that we can drive less and replace a parking stall with a housing unit. Site and building regulations, and this is an idea of just streamlining things so that the developers are able to move through the planning process more quickly. And when they're able to do that, they save money and we can insist on more affordability in the units. Universal design standards, and this has to do with having ordinances that ensure that our buildings are built with all ages and all ability levels respected, right? So that we have elders, we have disabled, and we need to know that when people are building, especially multifamily homes, that we have units that some of them are set aside for disabled and other people. State requirements, emergency shelters and homeless. Our new governor is very concerned about this, and money is already starting to be set aside for us to expand our emergency shelters and care for homeless persons. One of my issues is that if a city cannot provide housing for all of its residents, then we need to have safe parking areas. In Kenyatta College, we have students who are sleeping on the benches at night. Their parents probably moved to Vallejo a long time ago, right, or some other outlying area. And so we need to be careful that we have safe parking places for college students and others to sleep at night, so that they don't have to go back and forth and they have a safe place to live. Reasonable accommodations, this too has to do with fair housing laws and making sure that we look at our community and we provide housing for people of, again, communities of color, disabled, and other protected classes. You've probably heard about accessory dwelling units. This is a really great way to create affordable housing. A lot of ADUs have been built in many of our cities. Many of them are being used for Airbnb, which is not affordable. But in many cases, the children of families cannot afford to live here, so they build the ADUs for either senior relatives or for their own children. So it is a great way to add to our affordable housing stock. State density bonus, that was the state, in addition to our having our own ordinances, the state has a density bonus law. It says, and it has very specific percentages, saying that if you want to have, if you're willing to increase your the units, then you need to have a commensurate number of affordable housing units to go with that. Public Lands Act, one of my favorites. This is saying that if there is public land in any of our communities, then that land needs to be offered to affordable housing developers first. And some of us believe that BARD and Caltrains and those properties are actually public. And so our board actually agreed with that. And they are putting 15 to 20% of any housing that goes on their land, they're setting aside for affordable. And we're currently working with Caltrains to have them consider the same percentages. The home sharing, we know about HIP housing and opportunities that people have to share a bedroom in their own home. And one of my favorite stories is an older man who was, he invited a young woman to come in to have a, so that she could afford to live here in the community. And as he got older, her responsibilities grew, and it became a real win-win situation where she was able to stay in the community and he had someone so that he could live safely in his home. So that was one of my favorite stories, and you may remember that one, I don't know, Barbara. So permanently affordable homeownership. Some communities have community land trusts. And so they're able to set aside a certain percentage of that property for affordable housing, usually condos, so that people can, who are lower income, can buy condos and have the foot in the door of home ownership. So my spouse had just walked away, but we are, if you want to push the arrow there. So now, as I said, I knew that you would all be so disappointed if I didn't talk about rent stabilization. So in California, maybe I could preface this by saying that when I was campaigning, yeah, that's it. That's the right one. Yeah, that's the right one. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you. We have a lot of new residents in Redwood City. And if they come from other parts of the country or they come from other countries, they're really surprised at how upset people get when they talk about rent control. Because in other cities, in other countries, they take care of their residents. And those of us who have been affordable housing advocates never dreamed that we would be working on this issue. We wanted affordable housing, period. But then more and more of our, in my case, people from I'm a veteran leader with Faith in Action. So we started hearing from our congregations that people were being displaced in large numbers. And this was 15 years ago. And so we decided, well, we need to do something about this. And so when there's a safety issue or some other issue, that we have seat belts, we reduce the mileage, we say that you can only drive 25 miles an hour through a residential area. We do things in order to protect people. This stabilizing rents protects our people who live here, and it protects our community. The example is the young woman who quit her job in Belmont. We don't need to be losing our teachers because they can't afford to live here. And so what stabilizing rents means, and that's why I use that term instead of rent control, because the old rent control in New York meant that people could live in that unit for generations and they never had to pay any more rent, and there was not the element of fairness that exists currently in California. In California, buildings that were built after 1995 are exempt. Single-family homes and condos are exempt. And many of the ordinances that I personally have supported, there's an annual increase of CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Now, the old ones that were passed in the 70s in San Jose, San Francisco, and in Oakland, those are percentage of CPI. But the ones that we've been supporting are CPI, and that's generally lately about 3%. And there are very few people who get 3% even increases in their jobs, right? And so even that is something. And when you're already paying $1,000 or more, $1,500, $2,000, that's not nothing. 3% is not nothing. So anyway, that's what we were advocating was the CPI. There's another, where am I? Vacancy decontrol means that as soon as someone leaves the unit, the landlord can raise the rent to whatever the market will bear. And so that's what's happening in San Francisco. Landlords, so the rent's gradually going up and there are fewer and fewer affordable units in San Francisco because of vacancy decontrol. But it is an element of fairness and it is letting landlords increase the rent of those units. And my favorite story with that one is a young man who, he and his wife have lived sometime for many years in a unit in San Francisco. And he was telling the story that the people above him had moved out. They put in granite countertops and hardwood floors. And he said, we don't need granite countertops and hardwood floors. I'm just glad that we're still able to be here. And we're able to live here and we're close and we don't have to have a long commute. So that's a great example of how well it works in the cities where we have it. And there is already, it's legal for the landlord to recoup if they need to put up a new roof or replace the furnace, then there's a way for them to recoup that from their tenants. And in East Palo Alto is currently the only city that has rent control in all of San Mateo County. And so they, each tenant so there is zero impact on the cities, zero impact on the general fund in the city. And in East Palo Alto, the tenants pay about $13 a month, and they view it as an insurance policy, where they know that they're secure and they will not have to pay extra. They will not have rent gouging referred to it. But they are the ones who are paying for it anyway. I just wanted to make that very clear that it's written so that the landlord pays it or the tenant pays it. It's never the city. It's never the city. And often, if it is the landlord, he passes it on to the tenant. So, but they do not complain because it's a matter of safety for them. So, yeah, that's my list. And I think I've gone through this too fast. But the last time we talked about housing, there were a lot of questions and answers. So I was trying to get through all the technical stuff quickly because I was afraid I would run out of time. So I did not run out of time. So, but I do remember that there were a lot of questions before. So. If someone wants to do a mic and want to use the mic up here. Sure.
So I understand that that the communities around the Bay are under a lot of pressure to build a lot of affordable housing. And one thing we didn't talk about, which I was hoping we would be able to comment, is how you feel about pressures to build affordable housing along the Bay, say east of 101. And it's not even just on this side of the Bay, but I know Newark is building like crazy right along the Bay. But my concern is that there's a lot of pressure for these communities to build affordable housing in areas subject to sea level rise or open space that is needed in communities. Like I live in North Fair Oaks, and we have no open space except the nearest places down at Bedwell. And our whole area is subject to a lot of flooding. And so I was wondering if you could comment about areas, say building east of 101, the pressures to build affordable housing in areas that are subject to sea level rise.
So the irony for me was that years ago, I was promised affordable housing if I supported the housing we built over on the east side of 101, and it turned out that promise went away. So that's when I turned. I became not an advocate because of that. I felt like I was double-crossed, but I am a supporter of affordable housing along transit corridor, period. I think that is, we need protections from greenhouse gases. It happens that as a new council member, I asked to be on the flood control subcommittee. So I'm now going to be going to those meetings and finding out how we can protect our neighborhoods from flooding. And I often say that people on the east side of 101 are they're in danger of sea level rise, but truly that's not it, is it? I mean, people on the west side also are in danger of flooding, and so when we look at those maps, it's amazing the communities that are impacted when sea level rise takes over. So we have some very serious work to do, and one of them is not building housing on the east side.
Thank you so much, Diana, for your words. Really thoughtful, really appreciate them. I'm curious if you could give us a little bit of... Yeah, sure.
There you go.
Curious if you could give us a little bit of insight into how you feel the Redwood City Renter Protection Ordinance that was passed has played out. Any thoughts or kind of how things should move forward and how things have kind of come to be currently?
So that is a great question because the city adopted renter protection ordinance exactly a year ago. And there was so one of them was relocation benefits and the other was a one-year lease. And so I sent the council at the time an article that came out that week from Menlo Park, where residents, they have an ordinance, a one-year lease ordinance, but there was no protection behind the lease. And so this family was telling the story that they went to their landlord and asked for a one-year lease, and he said, yes, you can have a one-year lease, but it's going to cost you another $1,000 a month. No kidding, that was the article. And I shared that article with our council, and I said that unless we have additional protection, this is meaningless. And actually, it's harmful. In fact, both of the ordinances were harmful because they give residents a false hope of protection. And so the other one was relocation benefits. The criteria are so narrow that it really doesn't help people. And there's so many opportunities for loopholes. And actually, we're facing that right now with on Duane Street because the landlord would be facing the need to give their tenants relocation benefits, but instead he's evicting them. So there's a big loophole for you, you know. And so first he was giving them 150% rent increases. And now he's just evicting them. So, you know, these ordinances have huge loopholes. And City Council had a off-site, and I brought up this issue and asked that we revisit it. And I didn't have the votes among council members to revisit it right now, but I have not given up. And I'm going to continue to try and have that revisited. But at the moment, I don't encourage tenants to ask for either one because I feel that it provides a false hope. And unless they have a really good relationship with their landlord, I don't trust the process.
The library asked us to make a quick announcement before we take another question. If you have a white Dodge van parked in the back on the street behind, right next to the train, your car door's wide open apparently. Anybody have a white Dodge van or we're safe? Okay. On to the next question. Wow. Yeah.
I don't need the microphone. Oh, I'm sorry.
Apparently recording.
Oh, you're recording, okay.
There you go. Thank you.
Diana, that was really great in terms of the discussion you had, or talking about the various different ways of trying to address both the affordable housing issue and also kind of the supply side of the housing issue, you know, ADUs and promoting increased density in areas. But you didn't really talk much about the supply side of the equation, and it was really stunning when you were showing those maps that, you know, the jobs are here, the people are living out there because they can afford it better, and that causes all these commute problems. You can't obviously tell companies to build in Tracy, but there has been some talk, I know, about full mitigation plans. So for example, if a company wants to build offices in the city, they have to also supply, not just provide money, but supply the amount of housing that that employee demand would incorporate. Are you thinking, or is the city talking about anything like that here, since we seem to have a big office boom going on?
We have talked about that casually, and I am very clear about not supporting any commercial without the housing to support it. We have built 2,400 units of new housing in the downtown. It is 100% market rate, and one of my favorites is just flew out of my head. The one apartment building of not Inverness, it's
Indigo.
Indigo. Thank you. The studio is $3,800. I'm going to let that sit for a second. The two-bedroom is $7,400, and they have a penthouse for $32,000. That building was not built for any of our residents, not one, in my opinion. And so that's the kind of thing that I would like to see avoided in the future. You know, that we need to be very clear about both the residential and the commercial businesses that come into our city. And with regard to commercial, and I've had this conversation with our city council members, when businesses come in, what are their gender equity policies? What are their other policies? Do they have commuter passes for their employees to discourage them driving in every day? You know, what are those kinds of policies? And so that we have a standard for people who are coming into our city. Thank you for that question. That was a good question.
It seems the transit hub idea is big at the moment. My concern is, having lived through grade separation for San Carlos and Jefferson, normally the way they do it is they put the railroad track temporarily beside the old ones so they can either dig or they can do stuff. I don't see them having the room now if they're talking about building all this housing on the railroad tracks or beside it.
That's a really good question. I know that this, the grade separation, actually, Whipple came up. I attended the Progress Seminar in Monterey where we had representatives from labor, developers, our city and county and other people were there. And that whole thing about grade separation on Whipple came up. And so I know that it's still in the pipeline. I know that they still plan to do it, but I can't respond to their specific question about that. I don't see why that would be a problem, but I don't know enough about it to really respond intelligently.
Well, you build apartments right beside the railroad tracks, and then there's no place to put the tracks when you're trying to do grade separation.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I will definitely follow up because I'm eager to be able to respond to questions like that. That's really good.
What is their plan? They know what they want to do grade separation, so maybe they then know, okay, well.
Well, that's what I'm hoping. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping is the answer. But as I said, I don't know that for sure. So.
There you go.
Good evening. I can answer that one.
Oh, good.
I can answer a lot of questions actually, about what we're discussing tonight. But but I also come with my own biases and prejudices about all this. But your question about the grade separation and the width of the right-of-way. In fact, it's been at least 5 years since Caltrain has widened the width of the right-of-way on paper. So that what you see being built in San Carlos, that will accommodate the additional tracks when they electrify. Now, if you go up and down the peninsula, if you see housing starting to go in, it has been built or will be built to respect that new right-of-way or setback to allow for electrification, namely another 2 tracks all up and down the peninsula. So yes, they're not totally asleep, these folks. They're napping, but they're not totally asleep. A couple of questions I have to the speaker. I've been in Redwood City for 35 years. I was just a tiny little tot when I got here. So one of the things that's always bothered me and continues to bother me is that there is this separation of organizations, agencies, and dollars. I remember a time when the school district came before the Architectural Review Board to propose tearing down an office building on the Sequoia campus and building a brand new single-story office building because that building did not come up to the latest seismic code. Now, this is simple stuff, but if you are a trained adult individual working in an office on grade and you have a monthly seismic or fire drill, there is no need to tear down that building and make it more seismically safe because you can out the door with your colleagues long before that building starts to be dangerous. So what I proposed and got laughed out of the room by the school board was, why don't you at least build some teacher housing above the offices on the Sequoia campus? Well, that was school board money, and they don't spend money on housing, they just spend it on school teachers, school facilities. And of course that comes all the way down from Sacramento on what you can spend money on. The folks at City Hall, they have some money now. Where they get it from the 500-pound gorilla who's building the campus down near North Fair Oaks. And if you look at what they're building in North Fair Oaks, or just edging onto it, Stanford University, there is a Zippo accommodation for the folks who live in North Fair Oaks. There is a child care center going in, but it is deliberately closed to the community of North Fair Oaks. The parking structures they're building is kind of the border wall between North Fair Oaks and the campus. So, but they have their own money, and so they had to pony up, I don't know, what is it, $9 million or something to the city of Redwood City as their ticket of admission. We're still waiting to hear how you're going to spend that $9 million on the council, and do we get even a sniff of it? Or who's going to decide how it's spent? And then the college board.
Brother, is there a question there? I'm waiting for a question.
He's educating us.
I'm not so much educated, I would like to have Ms. Reddy's view of all of this stuff. How come we can't nail all this down into one pond? And the only way I think the council's going to get religion is if we all show up on buses with torches. Otherwise, no, I'm serious. Not necessarily, not literally torches, but unless the council sees that we, the voters, have power, we'll just sit here with one council person who's doing a great job. Thank you for doing this. But how about the other 6? Where are they? So that's my shtick.
It happens that I was working in that single-story building that you're referring to, and this weekend, there were board members from Redwood City and Sequoia, and some of us were talking to them about teacher housing, and you're absolutely right. We can no longer, we're not living in this isolated sort of world. We need to be thinking of, we were talking earlier, right, about having retail with housing above. I mean, this has got to be the new normal. And I've said this to developers before, that build whatever you want, but put housing on top of it, you know. So I think we do need to consider that. We need to consider building housing, whatever we're building, we need to make sure that we have the housing to support the businesses that are coming in, and I completely agree with you. Thank you for that comment. That's true that Caltrain still owns that land on either side. We cannot build apartments on the Caltrain's land, so that's good to know that it's wide enough to accommodate whatever needs to go in there. North Fair Oaks, I'm going to have to find out about that. I don't know about that. So we welcome Stanford into Redwood City, and I don't believe that we got the community benefits that we might have and that other communities have had from Stanford. And so that's another area that I'm very concerned about, is that when companies come into our city, that we do have the community benefits. And in addition to housing, the downtown parks, childcare, I mean, we have a lot of needs. And so we just need to be careful that when businesses come in with their employees, there are thousands of employees, that they bring with them benefits and not just the negative aspects of whatever it is that they're doing. So is that everything?
I hear you. I just wanted to ask about height limits and specific, well maybe not so, but it is a general question, but as an example for, could we build a ton of very high, like a Sequoia station, just make that very dense, very high, especially if it was, especially if it was, I'll say affordable or all for it.
So the housing around Sequoia Station is not affordable. Is that?
My question is, so you can assume for a second that I am asking about affordable, but
Okay.
I just want to know about height. So like, can we just make Sequoia Station itself be, let's say mixed use, but have just a ton of housing on top? Is there a limit
Sure.
for height if what you want? And even if, like, let's just assume for a second that we did all 100% affordable housing with the
Sure. So I mentioned density bonuses, and one of the things that we in Redwood City did was, in order to streamline plans for developers, is that we created this height limit that is already pretty high. And so there's not that opportunity to negotiate for density bonuses. So we actually have pretty high height limits already in Redwood City. And I'm all for Sequoia Station having a lot of housing. And again, it's the same thing, that it's all mixed use. Mixed use is the future. That people who work in offices need to have housing nearby. Services need to be nearby. We are not all going to be living in single-family neighborhoods. And just to be clear, I'm not an advocate for building multifamily apartment buildings in the middle of single-family neighborhoods. That's not my deal. But I do think that it's perfectly sane to increase the heights along the transit corridor so that we can increase density and encourage people to use transit instead of cars. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
You answered it better than I asked.
No.
Hi, Diana. I actually want to ask you a question on behalf of the Predominant Tenants Union. We know we have your support. We had a rent rally. The tenants want to know, what do we have to do to move the council to get the votes you need to just look at those horrible supposed renters protections again prior to waiting? Waiting until next January is not going to help the tenants. It's a detriment. We've told our stories, we've spoken to the mayor, we've reached out personally, we've had a rent rally, we've been on the news, we've been in the newspapers, I went and spoke at Sacramento. We still can't get the votes for them to just even look at it again. We want to know if you have any suggestions on how we can help you get the votes to help us.
So some of you know that I ran for city council because I felt that the renters that I represented were being disrespected. And I felt that I would be more effective on council. And so we worked hard to get me here. And so it's not a surprise that you still have to have a majority of the council supporting whatever your issue is. And all I can say is that I'm working on that.
We know you are.
And so there's a lot of what we need to do behind the scenes, in order to have that happen. I don't have the four that I need. I think there are 3 of us, but not 4. I don't know that we're going to have a council that's going to do it, and I think that there may need to be some legal responses, maybe not for the city, but for we have some amazing pro bono attorneys that help renters, and so anyone who knows that there are people in trouble who need that kind of contact, please let me know. But I think that's where we're going to have to go with this, because people. So this is Stasha. Stasha's. She has had months. She and the tenants in her building have had months of health and safety violations, which she has documented, painstakingly documented. And so what we're trying to do is find an attorney to represent them, just to be honest. Candid and honest. And so I think that's where we're going, because we have so many examples throughout our city, throughout all of our cities, of people who were interested in speculating our older buildings and just evicting everyone in that building, which is the case here, so that they can double or triple the rent that is currently being charged. And so there are a variety of ways of addressing it, and the tenants came to city council, and that didn't seem to be very effective, so I think that we are ready to look at other avenues. Mark?
I have a teeny question, sir. Amongst your 6 colleagues, what, if any of them, have been clearly stating why they oppose these proposals having to do with housing?
So the response I get is, well, let's wait and see what happens. That was the first year. That was last year.
We got
And
a guy
now
in the
we
White
have
House that
this.
says that twice a week.
And so, yeah, it has been frustrating. It's been very frustrating.
A lot of the problem is our fault, because we are not going to the city council meeting and telling them every month, this is the problem. The Duane Street building where she is one of 5 buildings on that street. And the same speculator owns all of those buildings, and he's using the same method. And I think we have to find a way to take these massive profits away from people who are just going in, displacing everybody, sending them out of the state, and retain some homes. And the way we have to do that is make sure that they cannot get super profits. They cannot just polish the floors and triple the rents. And that we have to do with rules, and I'm not sure we can do that locally. We may need a regional solution. And I spoke to you earlier, and I see there's a problem with getting this on the agenda, and we should be speaking to the mayor and the vice mayor and letting them know that housing needs to be addressed now, because in a year from now, the people who are complaining about housing will not be here.
What happens, the 3 top priorities of the council are housing, transportation, and children and youth. So housing is up there.
In theory.
So mostly they're very interested in building affordable housing, which is happening. I'm very happy about that. Hundreds of units of truly affordable housing is in the pipeline, and so that is happening. But the protection part, for whatever reason, is scary. I'm not sure why it's as scary as it is, but anyway, so I'm trying to make it less scary. Yeah.
Hi, so I'm going to actually piggyback off that last question because that goes really nicely with what I was going to ask. But a lot of us, so I grew up in San Mateo and still live there, and a lot of us, the younger people who are not there who now live with their parents like I do, very much feel disheartened by our local representatives and are really turning to, I think at this point, statewide solutions and regional solutions. One of my favorite old San Mateo Times articles from 1982 is titled "Lack of Housing, a Major Problem." So you can see that this has gone on for a long, long time, and people our leaders just haven't been leading essentially for a very long time. So I guess my question is essentially, what do you think about some of the regional solutions that have been proposed? The SB 50 bill for housing by Scott Wiener, the CASA Compact. Most of us, many of the people that I know don't trust, say, Burlingame to build enough housing, don't trust, I think most of the cities in San Mateo County at this point to do anything meaningful on rent control or on tenant protections. So my question is essentially, what do you think of regional solutions?
So it happens, we were talking about that very thing in a meeting that we were, some of us belong to the San Mateo County Anti-Displacement Coalition, and we were talking about that very thing because our members are at the table with the CASA Compact, right? And so what we're being told, so if I can do the renter protection pieces, and I actually have the list of them if you want more detail.
I'm just going to interrupt quickly. Does everybody know what the CASA Compact is? Have you all heard of that? Because it is a regional 9-county proposed solution to help with housing. And it's up for, there's going to be a lot more meetings coming out about it.
So the CASA Compact they were guidelines, regional guidelines. And so the response to the compact is that there are now bills that are going through Sacramento, going through the process. One of them is SB 50, Wiener's SB 50, and then there are four renter protection bills, which are going as a package. That were, well, that's why I was, okay, 3 of the 4 are going as so advocates are trying to keep those 3 together. And what we're learning is that what we're learning from the authors of these bills is that they need more than tenants to support them. So that's what we need. We need because we have regional and statewide tenant organizations that are backing these bills and trying not to get them weakened. So that's the other challenge. And I could tell you the specifics of each of those bills because we talked about it just today. But that's the fear, is that they're going to be weakened and they will be meaningless. And so the question to us as advocates was, do you support the bill as it is? And how much weakening can you stand before you pull your support? So kind of like that. SB 50, the challenge with SB 50 is that I was talking about priority areas in our communities. And so those priority areas in Redwood City are where currently naturally affordable housing exists. And so unless we're very careful about making sure that there's enough affordable housing in whatever is approved, all we're doing is gentrifying and displacing even more people. And the benefit of SB 50 is that there are tax advantages to building in those areas, but affordable housing developers cannot benefit from those tax advantages because they collect state and federal funds and they get funds from different places and there's an immediacy in the funds that they raise. But market rate developers, they've got more time that they can play with their money and for some reason they're able to take advantage of these tax advantages. So unless we're very clear about the level of affordability that goes in, we're just going to continue to gentrify our areas. I personally support SB 50. I know Wiener is trying hard to meet we advocates did not support it last year, and so the people who were supporting or concerned about loss of local control, they didn't support it, and then we on the other end, we didn't support it because of the lack of affordable housing. So these two ends that never speak to each other, both opposed it, right? And so this group still opposes it because of local control issues. But in the final analysis, the cities still have to approve whatever it is. So there isn't any real loss of local control because you still have that. It's more of an opportunity conversation rather than a forcing something on people. But we're still keeping an eye on the affordability aspect of it. One of them does include a cap on rents to prevent rent gouging in statewide. It would be statewide. So what will we tolerate? I mentioned before CPI, which is 3%. That's never going to be, offered. So it's going to be 5%, 8%, 10%, 150%. What percent can we tolerate and still support a cap on rents? As I said, when your rent is already $2,000. Having a 10% rent increase is way more than any of us gets in rent increases, right? I mean, in wages.
And then we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, good. The question and answer did last one. Okay.
It did, yeah. Anybody else have another? Okay.
I do have details. I have links for rent stabilization, just cause, the urban habitat report. So if anyone's interested, the slides, if anyone's interested in more detail, I'd just be thrilled to give it to you.